So that was simple mathematics. We've talked about variables. We've looked at running Python both in the file as a file and in the console. Now, what else is really important to learn right at the beginning are error messages. So there are three types: syntax error, exception errors, and logic errors. The first we'll talk about is a syntax error. What does this mean? Well, remember we talk about Python syntax, or any programming language syntax, which is basically the rules that you need to follow to write the code so that the program can understand it and interpret it. If you make a syntax error, that means that the program could not interpret what in the world you wrote. So, for example, in the console, you see line 16, I have count equals 1. Line 17, count equals count plus 1. I run that, I have an error. Why? Because if you remember, variable names are case sensitive. So I started with count equals 1, then I have count equals capital count plus 1. Well, Python tells us here, name capital COUNT is not defined. So this variable with a capital C is not defined. So I don't know what to do, and I'm going to break. I'm going to give you an error message. It tells you it's in line 1. In this instance, of course, it's always going to be line 1 because we're writing just one line at a time. But the name error gives you the specifics. Name of count is not defined. Now, exception errors. This is an error that happens at runtime. So look at the console. My text equals Murray had a little lamb. My num equals 5. My total equals my text plus my num. Bam, we get an error. This happens when Python runs. So it's running. It didn't stop running because there was an error with the way I wrote my code in syntax. Everything I wrote here is correct, but when Python runs it, it doesn't know what to do. Again, read type error. Must be str, not int. Now, what does this mean? If you remember from a couple slides ago, what does str stand for? Yes, string. Not int. What's int? Integer. So, I assigned the variable my text a string. Mary had a little lamb because it's in quotes. I assigned my num 5. 5 only, not 5.0, but 5, which is an integer. So in the third line, which is line 21, I say my total equals my text plus my num. So it's taking the string, Mary had a little lamb, and trying to add it to 5. Of course, Python doesn't know what to do with that. You can't add a string to a number. So it gives me an error. That happened when it ran. So that's an exception error. It's during runtime. Syntax error happens when it's trying to compile it right before it runs. Lastly, logic error. This is the trickiest of all because there's no error message from Python. The code is valid. It produces an incorrect answer. The problem is you don't know why. So these are very difficult to track down. So look at the example in the console. Num1 is assigned the value of 33. Num2 is assigned the value of 45. I put a comment. I want to add the two numbers. Then I say total is assigned the value of num1 asterisk num2. Okay, let's print it. Print total. What happens when I print it? I get 1485. I say, what in the world is that? If I add 33 plus 45 in my head, I have 78. Why doesn't Python know how to add? Now, if I'm not printing total here, and I'm actually using total further down in my code, you can see how this logical error could cause all sorts of problems, because then you have to backtrack and figure out where total is assigned, what's going into total, what's happened to total since it was assigned its initial value. Lots of problems with logical errors. This one is simple because guess what? I used an asterisk instead of a plus symbol. This could easily happen to you as you're typing out your code, thinking about the next line of code that you need to perform, what performed 5 lines of code before. You might accidentally type asterisk instead of plus. You get a weird total. You don't really see what happens with that total until 500 lines down below, and it's a really pain to figure out. So that's a logic error. So 3 types of error: syntax, logic, and exception. So that's the basic lecture for today from the readings. Now I'm going to jump ahead a bit, only because this is pretty easy and I want you to use it for the homework. If you want to read about it, see Mueller chapter 6, titled the section titled Getting User Input. Why do we need input from users? Well, if you think about almost any application you use on the computer, anytime you click a little icon on a desktop, you are giving input to the software. So we need to interact with users quite a bit. I would imagine that most of your group projects at the end of the semester will take some sort of user input. To do this, we need to provide a means for receiving user input. We do it with the built-in function called input. Isn't that nice? It makes sense. That, again, this is why Python's great. Things like built-in functions, built-in functionality of the programs, they make it easy because they name things appropriately, unlike other computer languages. So, how did I know about input? Well, if you click on the link on the screen, which is really important for you to do, so do it right now before you forget, this will open up the manual. Bookmark this site. This will save your butt when I assign homework, when you're working on the group project and you don't remember exactly what the name of the function is that you're trying to find in Python, or you think, my goodness, this has to be a built-in function in Python because everyone must do it all the time. Well, it's probably going to be in the manual if it's available. In fact, it will be in the manual. So read this. This link here will take you directly to the input function description.